welcome to our first video blog of our parent training for behavior management. Since COVID hit, parents are spending a lot more time at home with their children, and we thought that they might need some support. It is likely that your parenting style is perfectly fine, but if you're getting a little frustrated with your child or your children and you would like to improve your ability to change their behavior, this video series might be useful for you. So my name is Jessica, and that's Serena. We work at the Galvin Growth Group in Novi. We are both students at Michigan State University in the doctoral program for school psychology, and we typically work with children and teens with disabilities.
Right. And I'll just talk a little bit about, as we're getting started, what it means, what our video topic means. So we are going to be covering parent training for behavior management. And usually when we refer to parent training, we just mean that we are not directly working with the children, but instead we're trying to provide parents with some tools and strategies to help their children. And we're focusing in this video and video series specifically on behavior management. So we will aim to provide you with a bunch of different tools and techniques to really build up your toolkit that can help you address your child's behaviors. So we're hoping that this can help reduce any stress you might be feeling or that might be coming from behavioral difficulties from your child or children, and especially under our current COVID conditions, being at home much more than we're used to. So in our videos, we will use lots of examples and give step-by-step instructions for the skills that we're covering. And we also encourage you all to ask questions in the comment section, should you have any. We'll try to at least answer them in our follow-up videos if there's something we need to follow up on. And in our series, this will span over a few weeks, and we'll cover a whole range of different topics, but all of them will directly relate to behavior and behavior management. In our first video, we will start with something as simple as changing the tone of your voice and using specific words in your daily interactions with your child or children. We'll also cover what's called the ABCs of behavior. That stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequences. So we'll get into the details of what that all entails. We'll give some tips on troubleshooting when the skills we provide maybe don't go as planned. And then we'll have some other special topics as well. Things like how to transfer these skills to adolescents, for example. And we also just wanted to let everyone know, and we'll have this link, and you'll see it in our description, that we are basing a lot of this information from a really great course provided by Dr. Alan Kasdan, who is a professor at Yale, I believe, and he has a very, very good course on these topics and is actually freely accessible through Coursera. So Jessica and I, we've both been trained in a lot of these topics, but we also took the course, and it provides a really, really neat structure to all of this, to making this all really understandable and giving small steps to increase our skill set. So we'll be taking a lot of examples and content from there.
Yeah, so now Serena is going to go ahead and talk to you about praise.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for staying on, and I will continue with our first topic, which today is praise. And we're talking specifically about the use of praise in our interactions with your child. So you may wonder why we're starting with praise today in our video series when the topic of this whole series is behavior change. Well, praise is actually one of the simplest and most effective tools that we have in our toolkit as we engage in behavior change. So in this video, I will explain how to most effectively use praise to increase the likelihood of accomplishing behavior change. So first, let's just define what praise actually is. It refers to expressing approval in some way, and most of you probably see it and use it in your everyday interactions with your child by saying things like great or well done. We also call this type of praise positive feedback, and it's probably the type of praise that you're most familiar with. And what are the effects of that praise? Well, it makes people feel better, and not just kids, but us adults too. We smile when someone gives us praise or compliments us. We're really pleased to hear it, and just generally we're happier when there's more praise in our life. But for today's purposes, let's expand our understanding of praise and consider two kinds of praise. The first kind might be called routine normal or praise in everyday life, and that's the one I just described, the one that you're likely already using and are familiar with. But for today's video, there's a second type of praise, which is our focus. And this praise is really useful when it comes to changing behavior. And this praise has three special features. First, the praise should be very enthusiastic. This doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be jumping up and down with excitement, but it should be a more elevated level of enthusiasm than you would use in your regular conversation. Something that tells your child clearly from the tone of your voice that you're happy with the situation. For example, it may look something like this. That's great. For extra effects, add in some hand gestures like a thumbs up or a high five, a happy facial expression, and be sure to use that encouraging tone of voice. So, then the second component is to state exactly what you are giving praise for. For example, if Johnny puts away his plate after eating, say, "Great, Johnny, you put away your plate, just like I asked you to." Inserting that statement of what you're praising for, the putting away your plate, helps your child know exactly what they're being praised for, and it will increase the likelihood of them doing this again in the future. What you're really doing is establishing an association for your child between putting away the dishes and a positive outcome, in this case, praise. And then the third component is something non-verbal. This could be a touch on the shoulder, a high five, rubbing the child's hair, giving a hug, a kiss, really whatever feels comfortable and natural to you. So in the example of Johnny putting away his dishes, you might say, "Great, Johnny, you put away your plate just like I asked you to do." And then you give a pat on the shoulder to give extra reinforcement. Physical touch helps most people, kids and adults, feel more reinforced. So, now that you know the three key features of praise, which are enthusiasm, clearly stating what is being praised, and adding a nonverbal, we have to identify when to use this kind of praise. To do so, you have to pick just one small behavior that you are looking to change. In our example with Johnny, it was putting away his dishes. You might use praise if it's a real struggle to get Johnny to put away those dishes consistently. So keep a lookout for when your child does the behavior you selected, so you can praise the behavior immediately when it occurs. That's really important. It will give you the best chance at success. When you try this at home, focus on one or at most two very specific behaviors at first, so you can practice giving praise frequently and consistently. Giving this type of praise doesn't come natural to most of us, so it's really on us to practice too, and selecting just one or two behaviors will really help you limit your scope and give yourself chances to practice. So don't choose anything too complex at the beginning. In our later videos, we'll cover in more detail how to handle more complex behaviors. And then as you're seeing more success with your praise, then that's when you can slowly add in more demands. For example, with Johnny, we are praising putting away his plate. If this is something he never ever does, let's start with praising putting the plate on the kitchen counter instead of rinsing it, and putting it in the dishwasher. So you're kind of lowering the expectations a little bit at first so that you have more opportunity to praise. And then you can slowly build up to the behavior that you're hoping to see. Alright, so those were the key components of giving effective praise. First, give praise enthusiastically, stating specifically what is being praised, and then also add a nonverbal. Then, make sure you're giving this praise frequently and for very simple behaviors, at least at first, like we said. And now that we have these three components, let's just review really quick why using this praise is so effective. First, with giving praise, you're increasing the likelihood that your child will repeat this behavior in the future. And then that will give your child more practice opportunities with that behavior and allow them to build habits, which is what we're really looking to do. But with giving this kind of praise, there are also some things to avoid, so I want to make sure to cover those as well. The first kind of thing to look out for that is very easy to fall into as we're trying to practice giving good praise is don't just throw praise out there, saying things like, great, wonderful, you're doing a great job. That's normal praise and that's fine, but it won't really change behavior. So you might be thinking that I'm giving all this praise and nothing's happening. Make sure you're using the specific type of praise that we're talking about here. We want to really be intentional and specific about using praise. And then secondly, another thing to look out for is praise the actual behavior that your child is doing, not your child themselves. So for example, don't say, Johnny, you're such a good kid because you cleaned your plate. We don't want our children to think that they're only good children when they do things we like. This can actually really decrease your child's self-esteem. And then relatedly, we also want to avoid implying that your love depends on your child's behavior. For example, saying something like, I really love you when you do your homework conveys the message that your love is conditional, so we want to avoid that. And then another thing to avoid is making the praise unintentionally about yourself by saying things like, you make me so happy when you clean your toys. We really don't want our kids to feel undue pressure and cause them to think that their parents' happiness relies on them and their behaviors. And then finally, one of the most important lessons and a really easy trap to fall into when using this type of praise is something that we call caboosing. And it's when you add something on to the end of the praise that undermines the entire preceding praise. For example, you give your good praise by saying, great, Johnny, you made your bed like I asked. You give a high five, that's your nonverbal, and so that was your effective praise. However, then you go and add a caboose, which is saying something like, why do I have to nag you every time to get you to make your bed? Or why can't you always be like this? Now, behavior work can be very frustrating, so it's very, very natural to express that frustration in those sorts of ways, or seeing the behavior one time can be so motivating that, if we add something on like saying, why can't you do this all the time? We may think that this will motivate our child to actually do it all the time, but unfortunately those statements just completely take away the effects of the prior praise and leave the child actually feeling pretty bad about themselves, most likely. So we want to stick with our three key pieces and avoid the caboose. Now, before I end, I'll leave you with some answers to frequently asked questions and concerns that come up a lot when we talk about praise. But if there's questions left unanswered, please leave them in the comment section, and we'll try to answer those in subsequent videos. But the first question I want to address is what a lot of people think when talking about praise is, will I need to praise my child forever to get them to do things? And that really shouldn't be the case at all. Praise is intended as a short, temporary tool until you see the behavior change that you want and until it becomes permanent. Once you see that your child has built up a habit, you can really ease up on the praise. And then another frequent concern is, will I spoil my child and make them expect praise from me for every little thing? And again, that shouldn't be the case either, because it is a short-term tool and only apply to very specific behaviors, not all behaviors. Kids generally don't build up that expectations. Again, we are applying this to specific behaviors that are not habits for your child yet. So think of praise not really as a reward, but as a motivator to your child to help them along as they're building a new skill or a new habit. And then once they get that repeated practice, and have the behavior down, you can ease up on the praise again and just go back to how you were before. So we hope this was helpful. Tune in next week for Jessica's video about antecedents. And just as a final reminder, the 3 ingredients for effective praise are enthusiasm, specific statements about what you're praising, and adding a nonverbal. Praise is a really great first step to getting the behaviors you want, but when we get to more complex behaviors, it may not be enough. So throughout this video series, as we move along, we'll keep adding more tools to your toolbox. So thank you for tuning in. Bye, everyone.